What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JFK Debates Project. I am your host, Matt Douthit from Dallas, Texas. Today we have researcher, author Dave Perry from Grapevine, Texas. Dave, how are you?
Good. How about you, man?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on. I I've I remember being 12 years old and in 2008 and seeing you on the Discovery Channel on the Unsolved History episodes on the JFK assassination. So this is kind of interesting. This is pretty cool. Thanks again for coming on.
Anytime.
Thanks again for coming on. Dave is also the author of this book right here, Tales of Deception and Imagination. Dave Perry, Investigating Kennedy Assassination Stories. He is also the author of the famous article from the third decade on Roscoe White called Who Speaks for Roscoe White? We'll get to that in a second. But first of all, where were you on November 22nd and what do you remember from that day?
I was sitting in the cafeteria of the State College at Worcester, Massachusetts. I was a sophomore, and they announced over the PA system that Kennedy had been shot in a motorcade in Dallas, and they sent us all home. So I went home, and of course, my folks, I was living with my folks at the time, and was watching the TV, and it was like nonstop coverage going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did the Oswald transfer. And when Oswald got shot, uh, outside of the audible gasp from all of us, uh, I thought, well, that's rather bizarre that, that this guy could get into a police station. And that was basically it. I, I, there was nothing much happening. They started talking about they were going to have an investigation. Now, at the time, I was a student in college. It wasn't until years later I ended up graduating from a school that was. I have a degree in secondary education with minors in earth science and biology, which is a far cry from where I'm at. I ended up teaching school in Poughkeepsie, New York. I did
Mm-hmm.
that for a couple of years, and I was in bad need of a car and married. Now I had a little daughter, and I wasn't making any money as a school teacher. So I was looking in the newspaper and I saw an ad for Travelers Insurance. If you were a claims adjuster, they trained you to be a claims adjuster, they'd give you a company car. And you could have so many miles a month on the car, for personal use. So I applied for the job, and it turned out that they were always looking for school teachers. So I got the job, and then I got into it, and I did a lot of multi-line stuff. But I got really interested in workers' compensation because it wasn't me going in and having these constant fights with attorneys and try to nickel and dime claimants, that kind of stuff. It was set up by the various states or the Longshore and Harbor Workers Union or Jones Act stuff, where they were paid a specific amount of money. Uh, it would give them a weekly salary. So it was more helpful than beating up on clients and working with ambulance chases. So that basically was my career. I retired down here in Texas as a assistant vice president of operations for the southern region for Continental Insurance. And of course, coincidentally, they had transferred me up to Glens Falls, New York, a couple of times. And the first time I went up to New York, uh, my son at the time, I think he was about 12 years old. He wanted a guitar. He was into Kiss and all that kind of stuff. I went and bought him a guitar, and I said, "Hey, who's going to teach him lessons? I don't want him. I want him to whoever it is. I want him to teach rock and roll." And they said, well, we know a guy, if you can get with him, that does it. And I went down to this guy's house and went in, and he had a rack full of Kennedy books, and was compiling Kennedy books. And that's how I met Gus Russo. Gus Russo
Ah,
taught my son how to play guitar.
really?
And he was living up in Glens Falls at the same time I was. Well, eventually, my company transferred me to Dallas. And I had already known a little bit about some of the people around here. But when I got in town, I could actually meet them face to face. And across the street from the building that I worked in was another high rise building. And there was a legal secretary in there. That was Mary Farrell. So that's how I met Mary Farrell.
And what
We
year
would
was
get
this?
together and have lunch, you know. And we're talking about 1989,
Okay.
1990, there. Um, then the next thing that happened is what I was doing was I was a claims adjuster. So I had to testify. I mean, I was not uncomfortable around attorneys. I knew how to get documents because I had to be able to go in and get things like death certificates, that kind of stuff. So I decided, well, since I'm here in Dallas, I'm going to start using that stuff I learned because I want to solve the case. And as a result, I volunteered to work behind the counter at the JFK Assassination Information Center.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And at the time, it was J. Gary Shaw, Larry Howard, and Larry Ray Harris were the three people running it. And it was very conspiracy oriented. Now, by this time, I'd met just about everybody. The only person I had not met, well, the only two of them was Jack White and Gary Mack. I hadn't met them at the time, but I knew Jim Lavelle. Jim Lavelle and I got pretty friendly. Uh, Matter of fact, I used to take him to lunch. He had a Mexican restaurant that he was a fan of. I used to take him there. Uh, so at any rate, I am working behind the counter, a volunteer at the JFK Assassination Information Center. And people would float in and out. Uh, Groden, Livingston, all those people would float in. They'd come in and come out. Well, and I mentioned this in the book. I don't want to be repetitive. I've been working there for a while, volunteering there for a while. And I had called Jim up and I said, hey, I'm going to, Gus Russo came in. At the time, I didn't know, I knew Stone was involved, but I did not know that Gus was trying to sell a script to him.
Hmm.
Uh, so, and Gus, when he would come into town, he would stay with me, actually stay at the house with me. So we would go around the countryside. Matter of fact, we together, just on a lark in 1990, decided we were going to chase down Buell Frazier,
Oh,
and we were the ones that found Buell Frazier. So at any rate, I called Jim because Gus was in town. I said, "Hey, we're going to go to this restaurant, El Phoenix. I'm going to take you to lunch because Gus, he'd like to talk to you." So we go over there and we're waiting, and in comes Jim, uh, Larry Howard, Gary Shaw, and Bud Finsterwald.
hmm.
Now, Bud Bud was kind of financing the JFK Center. I found out later they were kind of on the ropes money. So I was sitting around, and I'm giving Jim the evil eye because, of course, I was working at the time, so I had money. Right? But I said to him later, "You're sucking me into this big lunch for all these people." So that's when Finsterwald looked at us and said, his exact words were, "I hope you guys can find a new avocation because we've solved it."
Hmm. Solve the Kennedy assassination, right?
So you're right.
Oh.
So after the luncheon was over, I was talking to Jim, and Jim said, "I take all this with a grain of salt. I've been over there talking to him about this stuff." And but basically, what happened was, since I was working over there, I was trying to get out what the heck was going on with this, and they wouldn't tell me. So then I found out in August they were going to have a press conference.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to figure a way to get to into the press conference, and Gary Shaw, who was literally running the place, he no, he wasn't talking about this. So what happened was the date of the press conference, I figured, well, I'll go over there and see if I can schmooze my way into the press conference. So I go over and I get in there, and they got it was on the third floor of this, the fourth floor of this West End building. They were not letting anybody into the area because they had it set up with CNN. I mean, there was everybody was there.
Wow.
Well, I walked up to the kind of the gatekeeper and I said, "Is Dave Perry's name on the list?" And he looked at me. He said, "No," but Bud Fitzgerald was standing there, and he says, "Oh, let him go up." So that's how I got into the press
Wow.
conference. So I go in there and I'm listening to this, and there were a lot of things about the Tippit shooting that did not make sense to me.
Hmm.
Particularly when Ricky started talking about how they lived across the street from the Tippets. He had to shoot his best friend. You know, Roscoe had to shoot his best friend.
Hmm.
Well, Bill Anglin was Tippett's best friend. I'd never heard Roscoe White or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, after the press conference, I went up to him and I started talking to him and started asking him some questions. Well, wait a minute, you couldn't live across the street. You probably lived down the street. Oh, yeah. All that stuff. So after the press conference was over, I went down to City Hall and got the deed records for
Hmm.
Tippett and Ricky. And basically, I found out that Ricky did not live across the street from the Tippets at the time of the assassination, like he claimed. They
Hmm.
eventually lived on Glencairn, but it was farther down the street.
Okay. Yeah.
So I go back into the JFK Center and I say to Gary Shaw, I said, I know Bud said he had this thing solved, but there are some holes that need to be investigated. And I'm an ex-claims adjuster. I know how to get the records. Uh, I'll volunteer because I want to solve this too. So he said, okay. Matter of fact, I was there with my wife when he said it. She put $100 donation in the box on the way out the door. I still have the canceled check. But anyway, we go out and I start looking at this. And in the meantime, I think I'm getting this right. In the meantime, Gary Mack, who kind of knew about me, he gets in touch with me. And I said, well, I got into the press conference. And so he wants to get together. So we met. As a matter of fact, we met because I was taking Robert Groden. Robert Groden was going to a record signing to get autographs for his daughters for an outfit called the Wilson Phillips Group. They were the daughters of,
Brian
Robert.
Wilson.
So we were doing that, and I explained to Gary what I was doing, and I said that there's some real problems with this. I don't know what they are yet, but I'm going to start looking into it. I went home that night of the press conference and I looked on the TV, and there was an ex-reporter on the TV by the name of Hugh Ainsworth.
Hmm.
And he said, I think this story is fishy. So I called him up. This was the days of phone book. There was a toll call to Dallas for me, but I called him up and I said, well, I was at the press conference and there's some fishy stuff. I did not know him from Adam. I had no idea who he was at the time. And I said, I'd like to get together with you. And he said, well, okay, I'll try to do that, but I'm only going to give you about 10 minutes. So then I go back, and of course, Mary's working across the street. I go back, I call up Mary, and I call up uh, Gary, and I said, I'm going to meet this guy, Hugh Ainsel. Well, they went off the deep end. Uh, as a matter of fact, Mary said, take a look at his telephone number. And at the time, his telephone number ended in 666,
Oh.
mark of the devil. So then I started looking into it. And every place I started looking into it, it did not work. And the linchpin was, I don't know if you remember or not, but they claimed that Roscoe was working at this company and he was killed because he wouldn't take on one more assignment.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at the press conference press kit, and it was an outfit by the name of M&M Equipment was where. So I looked up the history of M&M Equipment, and I found out they were now a tree service in East Dallas. I drove out to this place, and I said, "Is anybody around here when Roscoe White was killed?" And there was one guy was there, and he took me on a tour, and he said, "All this stuff you're seeing on the TV is from this kid is crap."
Hmm.
So, and that turned out uh, when he was burned. Well, this guy told me, I don't want to make this too confusing. He said there was a guy that was burned with him by the name of Richard Adair. So I go back home, I call up Richard Adair, and
Mhm.
I said, well, he says, yeah, I saw the press conference. It's not accurate. So what I did is I went down to the court building because I found out Richard Adair told me we filed a lawsuit, and
Who
so
did?
did
Who did?
Richard Adair, the guy who was burned with Roscoe.
Mhm.
He, he ended up in the hospital. The two of them were in the hospital in the burn unit. Uh, so I went down and I got the stuff, and it was a workers' compensation case. What happened was these two guys were welding. There was a can of something called PC68 under the welding table. The slag dropped through and the container blew up on them. And Roscoe had burns over 95% of his body. And what they did is they brought both of them to Baylor. Baylor didn't have a burn unit. They sent them over to Park. And I said, well, at the press conference, there was this minister by the name of Jack Shaw that said he talked to Roscoe, and Roscoe apologized for all he did, and shooting the president. I'm thinking, I said, did you ever see this guy? And he says, no, we were in the burn unit. They would not let the family in. They only let you in one at a time. And I don't remember any minister,
Hmm.
right? Well, at the time, I was friendly with the Kennedy guy at Fox News, a guy named Richard Ray. I call Richard Ray up and I say, hey, can you get an interview with Jack Shaw for Channel 4? And he says, yeah. And I said, okay, here's what you got to ask. So he comes back, he calls me up and he says, we're not putting them on. And I said, why? He said, well, I had your notes. And he told me the story. And he says, well, I've talked to a guy by the name of Dave Perry who talked to Richard Adair, who was in the room with Roscoe. And Richard Adair doesn't remember you being in there. And that's when Shaw said, look, I was never there. Everything I heard from Geneva.
Hmm.
So I bring the lawsuits, the deed records, and the stuff from Richard Adair into Gary Shaw. And
Mhm.
I said, you guys got a serious problem. And I said, on top of it all, when we had that lunch with Jim Lavelle, Bud Finsterwald was saying you got it solved. At the press conference, he didn't say that. He says, if upon further investigation. Well,
Hmm.
I got the further investigation here, and you got problems. And that's when I became persona non grata with the whole crowd. Now, the other part of the story that I think is kind of funny
Yeah.
one of the guys at the uh, behind the conference desk there, beside Ricky and Trish's wife, and the rest of, was a guy named John Stockwell.
Hmm.
And over the next few days, I got introduced to him. He was talking to me, and it turned out John, he's still alive. He lives in Elgin. He was ex-CIA. At the time, I thought he was working the Roscoe White story. He was actually working for Oliver Stone. And what he said to me, he says, "Well, I know you're a claims adjuster and you're investigating this. Will you send me your stuff?" Now, he never told me at the time that he was working for Oliver Stone. And I said, sure. So I started sending him my investigation. And believe me, I got notebooks. I talked to tons of people involved in this case,
Mm.
uh, including Roscoe's mother, stepsister, uh, Geneva's family, all that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and then I went over the pictures in the press kit, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So I'm sending all this stuff to John down in John Stockwell. So a little bit of time goes by, and he calls me up and he says, "I have an apology to make to you." And I said, "Whatever for?" He said, "Well, you don't know it, but I went to school with Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone and I know each other." I says, "Well, okay, well that's fine with me." He says, "Yeah, but I've been sending him all your stuff." And I said, "Well, that's fine with me." Now this I was working on the third decade article, but I wanted to make sure I had a lot of documentation. So that's what I was sending him, the backup of what became my article. And I said, "Well, that's okay." He says, "Well, you don't understand." He said, Larry Howard and his wife, Ricky and his wife, had flown out to California to meet with Oliver Stone, and they pitched the Roscoe White story for $750,000. I says, "Yeah, what?" He says, "Well, Oliver said, I'm not buying it." And they said, "Why?" He says, "Because I got all this information from this guy in Texas by the name of Dave Perry, lives in Grapevine." So he says, "You got a bunch of people coming back on the plane that want your head on a plate."
Well, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's how I ended up in the
So,
basically in
Ian,
jail.
so I want to read this. This is JFK, the documented screenplay.
Right, right.
Every every researcher has this in their collection. On page 20, in an endnote, it says, quote, this is Oliver Stone writing, it says, quote, "In what appears to be nothing more than a publicity-seeking hoax, a Texas group that included White's son and widow presented evidence, in quotations, evidence, in 1990 that White was the real assassin behind the picket fence. Many of their claims have been debunked." And then it says, "See David B. Perry, who speaks for Roscoe White, the third decade, November 1991," which was your third
Yeah,
decade article. Who
yeah.
speaks for Roscoe White? So, um, so that, so I wonder if he still feels that way. I wonder if Oliver Stone still feels that way. I don't know.
Well, he actually, the guy, was eventually Gary and I ended up working for him.
But
Matter
yeah.
of fact, me, Gary, Groden,
Hmm.
uh, he put a guy behind the picket fence. We always questioned whether that was him or Files, because remember James Files claims he's the grassy knoll.
Well, in the Oliver Stone movie, it shows a guy in a police uniform shooting, uh,
Right.
but it's not the badge man position. So that has to be Roscoe. So they must have so I'm thinking they must have filmed it before Oliver Stone changed his mind, possibly.
No, no, because when they were doing those scenes, uh, I was I used to go down. We had passes to get in.
Hmm.
We had a-
Wow.
I wanted to be down there because I knew at some point somebody is going to be firing a starter's pistol in the grassy knoll.
Hmm.
And I was interested in the ricochet pattern
Hmm.
that was going on. And lo and behold, I mean, it bounces off the buildings.
Oh yeah. I don't think anyone disagrees on that. So
And just so everybody knows, Gary and I, we left when we found out that he was going to do Garrison, because neither of us were enamored with the Garrison stuff.
so you left the project as a
Yeah, I've been accused of being a lone nutter. I told people, well, I'm a lone nutter because I believe in a conspiracy, but I don't believe in your conspiracy.
yeah, that's the thing I wanted to ask you. So are you a lone nutter? Are you a conspiracy believer? Are you a fence sitter? Have you heard that, fence sitter where you can't you're don't know which side of the picket fence to choose, lone nutter or conspiracy? So I just wanted to ask you, and I've been wanting to ask you for forever, for a long time, do you believe Oswald pulled the trigger? Do you believe he was a part of a conspiracy? Just real quickly, what kind of conspiracy do you believe in? Could you could you explain?
Okay,
Because
I want to.
there's a so much confusion. What is Dave Perry? What is he? What is he? What does he believe? So, in 2 minutes or less, could you please tell us what you believe?
You're actually the first person who's asked me this to delve into it. Really, usually they want to know the history behind the stories, but you're the first person that's actually come out and said, kind of explain yourself. Okay, so here you go. All right,
Just
you
yeah,
got to remember. All right, I spent years as a claims adjuster trying to prove or disprove stuff. All
yeah.
right, and now I volunteered for the Grapevine Police Department. I now work for them. I run their crossing guard program. But I've got years and years of experience in knowing what police people do and how things work with attorneys in courts. All right.
Mhm.
Here's what I can tell you. Basically, any attempt that I have made to get Oswald out of this, I can't do. All right.
So do you okay?
I wasn't there. I cannot prove he pulled the trigger.
Uh-huh.
But the original discussions that were had long before anybody else, the missing gun from Ruth Payne's house. When they went out into Ruth
Yeah,
Payne's
yeah,
garage and flipped open the
yeah.
blanket, it wasn't there. All right. The shell casings, the rifle. Now, I cannot, I tell people I cannot get Oswald out of this.
Yeah.
All right. However, because of everything being sealed the way it's been sealed, I can't tell if he had an accomplice, not necessarily somebody on the grassy knoll. And the more and more I get into the stuff that's come out, this is where I get into there is a conspiracy. It does involve the CIA.
It
I
does.
know there are people within the CIA that wanted Kennedy dead. All right.
Mhm.
So, generally speaking, and I think I can almost speak for guys like Jeff Morley, this is why we want these files that they won't give to us.
Yeah.
And
So you think Oswald was working with the CIA? So you think he was a double agent, correct?
potentially,
Potentially.
yeah. And the motive has always been a problem. Now, various people have come forward and said, well, the reason he wanted to, uh, kill Kennedy was he was pro Castro and he was fed up with the Bay of Pigs and all that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff comes into the picture, but we cannot get the evidence for that.
Even his former roommate said that he was not a communist and that he was a double agent and that he was on assignments and everything. So, I mean,
Well, but again, you got people that claim that Roscoe White was the assassin.
we'll
Jim
go
Fox,
there.
There's a lot of the problem that we have. I think we all have, the guys that are really serious about this, is all the background noise.
Yeah.
There's pages and pages of who the heck is Prayer Man. Well,
Well, yeah.
or they argue over the ballistics. I don't. What I'm trying to do is everything to me points right now. Although if you asked me this 10 years ago, I couldn't say this. There somehow or other, the CIA are involved in this,
Okay.
and all my evidence is circumstantial.
Hmm.
Now, the other thing here is the CIA's complete lying about Oswald's trip to Mexico City. At least to my way of thinking, the minimum conspiracy is that they knew it was coming and they didn't do anything to stop it. That would be the starting point. Now, how deeply were they involved? So what we're doing is we're looking for is three case files. Janides is like the big Easter egg.
Hmm.
That's the Christmas present. All right. Uh, you got William King Harvey. He was a Bay of Pigs. Uh, you got Morales. Both him and Harvey were instigators of the ZR rifle program.
Yeah.
And what is ZR rifle? Assassinating foreign leaders. So you got all the elements of that somewhere buried in the files. And why will they not let us see the files of these three guys? So that's where I am. I guess you could probably say I, I'm a fence sitter who can prove a conspiracy, but I can't prove the conspiracy.
Yes or no? Did Oswald pull the trigger which killed the president?
I can't prove he did.
Can't prove it, but in your heart, based on everything you did.
Okay. Well, based on all the original stuff and the fact that he took a shot at Walker, I would say yes, he was one.
Yeah. Oswald was a completely lone assassin, like the Warren report said. Yes or no?
Uh, I no, I can't say that.
You
No,
can't.
because the CIA and the FBI completely snookered the Warren Commission. Let me just say one thing. People blame the Warren Commission for not doing their job. The CIA and the FBI made sure they couldn't do their job.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you think Oswald killed Officer Tippit? Yes or no?
Yes,
Do you think that Oswald was a double agent? Yes or no?
I don't know yet.
Well, in your heart of hearts, based on what you've seen.
I'm leaning more to yes than 10 years ago. I would be completely no. I'm leaning more to yes.
Did anyone tell Oswald to kill Kennedy? Yes or no, in your heart of hearts?
Uh, right now, I have to say no.
No? Okay. See, that's the thing.
Well, and here's the reason why.
See, that's the thing.
You
How?
can you well, I'm going to explain how.
Oh, okay, okay, all right, okay.
All right, you can have put in somebody's mind enough information, negative information or false information
Mhm.
that will get them to do something. All right.
So you think that they influenced him rather than
I'm looking for the influence to do this.
last one? Do you think Oswald was working for the CIA or intelligence?
On that one, I'm of the point where he could be, but didn't know it.
So let's see if I have this right. You believe that Oswald killed the president, but you think he was working for the CIA but didn't know it, but that they didn't tell him to kill the president, but that they heavily influenced him and put the idea in his head. Is that correct?
Somebody did. Somebody did.
Somebody put that. So does that pretty much summarize what you believe?
Yeah.
Okay, got
And
you. Okay, let's circle all the way back to the 1990 press conference. Um, in fact, you were talking about how they got stuff wrong with Tippett, right? Tippett. Is it, how Ricky said, "Oh, we lived across the street from them," well, but it was actually down the street, and a couple of years
But
later.
not at the same time. Not at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah, but could he be misremembering that? And that's just a small detail that he's misremembering. I mean, come on, it's just a small.
Well, the problem was all this happened when he was 2 or 3 years old, so he didn't remember
Yeah, yeah. So that explains why he got that detail wrong. It's that doesn't mean that he's lying. Would you agree with that? That he's lying because of
at,
that.
at, at, at that point. Yeah, but there were other things where I flat out proved that they were guilty.
For instance, if he was 2 or 3 year, 3 years old, of course he wouldn't know who his father's best friend was. Is it possible he just assumed it was JD Tippett? I mean,
Well,
that
here,
doesn't mean that he's lying. That just means that he's putting something together that's not true, but that doesn't mean that but that those two small details don't make him a liar overall. Would you agree with that?
yes.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, I wanted to play you this. You probably haven't seen this in 35 years. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Well, okay. That's the press conference.
Yeah, this person. I want to focus on the Tippett aspect for just 1 second.
He details his escape from Neely Plaza by going back over the railroad tracks down to his waiting automobile near Stemmons Freeway, which was a white 1962 Ford Galaxy. Sped away to the Oak Cliff area where he rendezvoused with J.D. Tippett, who was a family friend and also a fellow police officer at that time. The two of them then picked up Lee Harvey Oswald, who was also involved somehow in this plot. His exact activities are not detailed, but it is stated that he did not fire a shot that day. As they were driving, and the plans were to get Oswald to Red Horse Field for escape, Oswald panicked, according to the diary, fled from the car. At this time, J.D. Tippett, Officer Tippett, who was not cognizant of the details of the plot in any way, also said, "Rock, something's going on. I'm going to have to take you in." At that time, Rock killed J.D. Tippett, fled from the scene to a parking lot, and later disappeared. The diary, according to Ricky, Rock met up with Officer Tippett. He entered Tippett's patrol car and they proceeded to 1026 North Beckley, where Oswald rented a room. According to Ricky, the diary stated that Oswald was not the killer of Officer Tippett. According to the diary, Roscoe, after Oswald became alarmed and left the car, Rock and Tippett remained in the car, and Tippett became suspicious, somewhat alarmed, and told Roscoe that they were going to have to go downtown and straighten this out. Roscoe stated in his diary he could not permit that to happen and jeopardize the plan. According to Ricky, the diary stated that Roscoe White shot Officer Tippett with a 45 caliber automatic handgun, which had been modified to fire 38 caliber bullets. The fact is, Roscoe White was a professional assassin, and this separate, deliberate shot, the coup de grace, is consistent with the actions of a professional assassin, not a novice like Lee Harvey Oswald. Finally, the diary stated that Officer Tippett was not involved in the plot, that it was a chance encounter with Roscoe, whom he knew. He may have been doing a favor, but he was an unwitting participant, not a part of the plot.
Well, basically, what it boils down to is I was thinking here because I'm just sitting in the audience. I had a little bit more knowledge than any of the media did. Okay, and they were, to me, at the time, I mean, some of this kind of went over my head because I wasn't looking at it in a great amount of detail. But primarily, I was listening to the not the researchers who were trying to sell a script to Oliver Stone, but I was looking at the guy who was at the forefront of all this, which was Ricky White and what he had to say.
Hmm.
Now, the thing about it is, over the years that went by, they had I don't know if you've seen it, but they had a press kit. All right. And in the press kit, they had a lie detector test where Ricky took a lie detector test and they included it in the background. They also had a photograph, supposedly, of Oswald and White together in the Philippines. They had a lot of stuff in the press kit. So what I did was I started going around and trying to figure out where the stuff came from in the press kit and if it was verifiable. So what they said at the press conference was not the absolute proof of what went on. So and again, remember, when I came out of the press conference, the only thing that had me screwed up at the time was Ricky saying, we lived across, well, he was actually almost crying if you look at it. He said, we lived across the street from J.D. Tippit. My dad and Tippit were best friends, and he had to shoot his best friend, was in essence.
Well, we already talked about that, how he was 3 years old and he couldn't have known that. And he
Okay,
was just
however,
assuming. Yeah.
here's what the deal is. If he says that stuff,
Hmm.
all right, he should be able to provide proof. Although the simple proof would be if you lived across the street from him and you misremember it or you heard it from your mother, okay, and this is so important to you, go down and do what Dave Perry did. Go
Yeah.
down to the records office. But here's what the deal is. The guys who create these situations, who create uh, the Jim files, what they do is they take a scenario and they insert themselves into it. So
Mhm.
they take a series of facts and insert themselves into it. So what you have to do is you have to go around and check the facts. You have to, and another one that was mentioned. I don't know if you know it or not. I have notes on this there somewhere. But over Labor Day, we're now talking September. The press conference, I think, was like August 8th or 9th. So in September, they called for a meeting. There was Shaw, a whole bunch of people. They opened it up to a whole bunch of folks. And Shaw knew I was investigating this. All right. And one of the things that I was investigating was their claim in the press conference that Geneva White was getting shock treatments to deny the fact that she and Roscoe and Ruby were friends.
Hmm.
That's the simple deal. And in the press kit, they had a picture of Geneva with Jack Ruby. And in the press kit, they said that Roscoe White took the picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what I did in the press kit, they gave the name of the doctor. All right.
Hmm.
I called him up. And because this was all over the news, he was following it. And he said, and I said, look, I'm a claims adjuster. I know we got these HIPAA considerations. I know you can't discuss her case, but can you give me information on this?
Hmm.
He said, shock therapy is not used for what they're claiming it's used for.
Oh, really?
Okay. Now, we go to this meeting. Specifically, I was not invited to the meeting. They invited Gary, Nigel Turner, Robert Groden, Jack White, everybody but me. And Mary called up Gary and said, I'm not going if Dave's not going,
Hmm.
because she knew what was going to happen. So at this, he brings up the shock treatments. And Mary says, well, is this what shock treatments are for? And Gary Shaw, the kingpin researcher, said, he's dead. The doctor is dead. And she says, no, he isn't. Dave Perry talked to him 2 days ago. Dave, what did you find out? The doctor said shock treatments are not used for what you're claiming them for.
Yeah. So for those who are listening in the audience, the claim is that Geneva White, Roscoe's wife, they're claiming that the claim is that she was giving shock treatments to erase her memory of her knowledge of her husband
Right.
being one of involved in the conspiracy, and that's not what it's used for. But sort of like with the Tippett thing, is it possible that that detail, those details are wrong, but it's like, could there still be a kernel to the Roscoe story?
Well, what
Like,
I think what I ended up saying in that, who speaks for Roscoe White or generally, I said what happens is you go in there
yeah,
and there are so many of these. There are so many. Like,
yeah, I,
they didn't live across the street. No, the shock treatment. The best one was, to me, was the military record.
uh-huh,
You know, there's this whole story about him going out to his grandfather's house, which was partially burned.
hmm,
And in this footlocker, he finds his father's military record. And that's what a lot of this was predicated on. Well, I wanted the military record. I wanted to see what it said. So I ended up writing the Navy, the Department of the Navy, because the Marines are under that. And that's back in those days, there's a way you had to do this under freedom of information. I had to prove that he was a public figure. That was the first thing. So I did that with newspaper clippings and everything.
yeah,
Well, among it, I asked them or anybody else that had requested the military record and when they requested. Okay?
hmm,
Now, most people, I don't think, would even think of this. Well, they denied me the request. So I appealed it and I won the appeal. And they sent me back a note. And they said, in 1990, Jim Lazar asked for a copy of the military records.
hmm.
In 1988, Ricky White asked for a copy of the military records.
Hmm.
Okay? So my question is, if he already had them, why is he requesting them again? Okay.
I don't know. I just
Well,
don't. Go on, go
and
on.
I can go the whole business with Bill X being the in cahoots and wanting Geneva to hide the backyard photographs. All of that stuff. If you read through the articles that I've written on this, none of it is true.
Here, let's back up for just 1 second.
You know they've written another book. The book is out.
Yeah.
I can't make any sense out of it, but there's another book that they published.
What are you talking about, Admitted Assassin?
Yeah, admitted assassin.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, hold on 1 second. Okay, so to back up to the very beginning, let me give some structure first. Okay, so for those that don't know, in 1982, Ricky White goes through his father's footlocker, right? It was a
Right,
footlocker, right? And he finds what he thinks is a Bible, and
right.
but it's actually a diary. And I believe in 1984 is when Ricky comes across this diary entry. And in 1988, the diary was stolen by the FBI when they were investigating it. But what a lot of people don't know is that Ricky and his read it so many times over a 4 or 5 year period that he memorized the whole thing, and his wife Trisha memorized the whole thing. So we don't have the diary itself anymore, but we have a memorization of it.
Mhm.
I believe it was published for the first time in Jim Mars's updated Crossfire from 2013. I'm not sure if it was ever published before. I saw the original, a page of the original Mandarin manuscript from 1990 or something like that, but it's the exact same thing. So this is what we have left over from the diary. Everyone can read it right here. So, what do you make of? Why do you think that Roscoe would write this in his diary? What do you think his motive was for?
Well, this was written by somebody who didn't do their homework. That's basically what happened here. Because what you're looking at is the thing that officially got me kicked out of the JFK Center. What got me is when we found out that Geneva was writing diary entries.
You mean okay, so for the audience members, the reason why the Roscoe White story crashed and burned was because Geneva, Roscoe's widow, she fabricated another diary.
No, that was the second. No, we don't know about the first one.
This is from
We don't even know if the first one exists, actually.
well, this one, the first one existed and was seen by, Trisha and their babysitter and a bunch of other people. I don't think anyone doubts that Ricky had his father a diary from his father, but as I said, the reason why this whole thing crashed and burned in the 1990s was because Geneva for said, "Oh, I have a second diary that Roscoe wrote. Here it is," but it turns out she had just forged it. So people mistook that and said, "Oh, the diary was forged." But a lot of people didn't understand that that was the second diary. And Ricky admits it. He says, "Yes, my mother forged it, but this original diary that I had found in 1980, in the early 80s, this was my dad's diary." And people just say, "Oh, well, I think that," and that caused confusion. I hope I'm making sense to the audience right here.
What I did is I went into uh, when I was investigating this. I went in and I said, "You guys have got a problem with Lebanon, the
Hmm.
code name Lebanon,
Yeah, right here at the beginning.
okay? And I'm going to prove it to you." And the proof is in this right here. Okay?
Appointment in Dallas. By who?
Hugh McDonald.
And when was that?
Huh?
And when did it come out?
This was published in 1975.
1975. Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about 12 years after the assassination.
Mhm.
This diary was written at the time of the assassination and used the name Lebanon, right?
Um, we're not sure. I don't think anyone knows when the diary entry was written. It's possible that Roscoe could have written it later and then I don't know. I don't think anyone knows that.
Okay,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
this is what I read to Gary Shaw
Okay.
right here.
All right.
Okay? Who is the man in the picture? It was at that point that McDonald gave his mystery man a name. He called him Saul.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, what they've forgotten is there's another guy that they talk about whose name is Saul. All right?
Mhm.
To this day, he can't remember why, unless it was the Bible, and Saul calls Uriah the Hittite to be placed in the forefront of the battle. So I said, okay, you got these three names, Mandarin, Lebanon, and Saul.
Yeah, right here.
Okay,
Yeah.
who over the years, apparently his memory has lapsed. Okay, because when I saw his discussions about this, he talked about three assassins. And the three assassins were Saul, Lebanon, and Mandarin, and Roscoe was uh, Roscoe's name. So what happened to Saul? Why has Saul disappeared from everywhere but the original stuff? And the reason why is I said to Gary Shaw, Saul is an impossibility because that name was an invention of Hugh MacDonald. Now, that's another one of the problems.
So just for the audience, the theory is that Ricky or his mother read the book that you just held up and just stole those names and put them in the diary. Suppose that's the
When I said this to Gary Shaw, I said, "You got a pro." I started. I said, "You got Saul, you got Lebanon, and you got Mandarin."
Mhm.
I don't know about Mandarin. That's Roscoe. I don't know. Well, yeah. No, they didn't take it out. Lebanon, Saul, another code name in
Mhm.
the records building. Now that's been changed. Now somewhere along the line, when they were putting this story together, all right, they decided they were going to have multiple assassins, and I don't know where they got Lebanon, but somebody said, well, Hugh MacDonald wrote a book about an assassin by the name of Saul. So
Yeah.
Saul gets stuck in there, okay? So when I go to Gary Shaw, uh, he, I said to him, I said, you got a problem with these assassins. Oh, no, Hugh MacDonald's book verifies it. And I said, have you got a copy of the book? And he pulled down a copy of the book. I went to that page and I said, no, Hugh MacDonald invented the name Saul. So how would Saul, at the time of the assassin, know that Hugh MacDonald was going to use his name 13 years later? And oh, by the way, Saul was supposed to shoot Oswald. They keep reading it. So
So so as I said, who do you think wrote this in Roscoe's diary? Who do
I
you
don't
think?
know. I don't. Uh, what eventually came to me was I was doing all this stuff on Roscoe White.
Oh wow. That's your original research
Was
behind
my
it.
original research on Roscoe.
Oh wow.
All right. So again, it's one of these deals where I got stuff that nobody has ever seen. You remember when he was sent to Fort Sill for specialized ballistic training? Do you remember that from the press kit?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that from the press kit. Well, in his military file, it was the release. As a matter of fact, what I did is, I don't remember Harold Taft. He was a weatherman over here.
Mm-hmm.
I brought the certificate over to him that he supposedly got. It turned out he was learning how to release weather balloons. And they turned that certificate into him being one of these expert snipers. And every place I went, another thing most people don't know, I had.
So in other words, you're saying that the researchers took pre-existing documents on Roscoe and made them into something it's not? Is that what you're saying?
Or they took something that was a document from his file and reported it as something different to heighten the case. You can't, if somebody doesn't really read the specifics of that certificate and find out it was ballistic artillery, but it was for releasing weather balloons is what it was for.
Yeah, but like I said, that's one of those things where, like with the Tippit, Nate, street, live down the street. It's like those are things. I believe it was Gary Shaw or someone once told me that the Roscoe White story wasn't investigated properly back in the 1990s, and they got some things wrong. So to
Like what?
like the things that we mentioned, like Tippett not really living across the street from them at that time, about Bill Anglin not about JD Tippett not being Roscoe's best friend. All of these little stuff, like I said, could be um they got wrong, but could there be a kernel of truth to the bigger picture?
Okay, that's the argument they give. All right, but what I say
Uh-huh.
is when the bricks pile up,
Hmm.
you know, and you got this house that's built, and this brick gets pulled, and this brick gets pulled.
Yeah.
For example, the cables.
Yeah.
Okay, now I did extensive research on those cables, as did a forensic laboratory, and they found they were fake.
So for the audience, okay, so for the audience listening, in 1989, I believe it was, Ricky went to his grandparents' house, and he found this canister right here. And
Yeah.
inside was photographs, dog his father's dog tags, uh, just a bunch of stuff in there that belonged to his dad. And one of them was a something known as the Green Book that his father allegedly owned. And what was very interesting was there were these three cables right here. And the most important one is where is it? This one, which says right here, uh, foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. Now, again, for those listening, um, these cables were eventually snatched by a researcher by the name of Joe West,
Mhm.
and he took them to a laboratory.
No, he gave them to Kent the Meredith People magazine, who took them to the laboratory.
Yes, and you, thanks courtesy of Dave Perry, last year you quoted this in your famous article, just a sentence or two from it. But thanks to Dave Perry on his website right here, we have the entire report. And
Right.
in this report, it says that the cables, these supposed alleged decoded CIA cables that were supposedly Roscoe's, are bullshit. And it goes into exquisite detail on how they can't be true. And I agree. I agree that me, Matt Douthit, I got in contact with the scientist who actually did this. As you can see right here, James L. Hale Jr.
Right.
And I talked to him for several hours, and I I mean he's a scientist. This is thorough, and he says that these cables that were in the canister are bullshit. Now, I agree. I agree. This is something that's very damning. Um, so I guess the question could be, could Roscoe himself have forged these cables? Has that thought ever come into mind? Could Roscoe have forged these cables, hid them in the canister, and then that's where where Ricky found them years later in the late 80s. Could that be a
Well,
possibility?
when I've been asked that before, and my question would be, to what end?
I, I asked the scientist who did this. I said, what do you think happened? Why do you think Roscoe would forge those cables? And he said he probably would do it for fame, or maybe he was trying to write a book or a screenplay, and he thought, well, what the heck? This isn't going anywhere, so he buried them, and then he died sometime later. Do you think that that's possible? Could it be possible that Roscoe was likely trying to reconstruct possibly what a couple cables that he could have been given by the CIA?
Well, the problem I have with this is it's not only Hale that looked at these, but at least two military people, I've forgotten what their names are, have looked
Oh,
at.
Morse.
Oh, there we go, right there.
Yeah, yeah, this is from your website. So this
Yeah,
is another analysis. This is another analysis from a what was his job again?
that's off my webpage too.
Yeah, this is from Dave's web. And again, and again,
There's another one too.
and again, thank you for uploading this because these have been in your archives, in your files for a long time. So finally, they're on your website. So I give you credit for that. So yes, I concede that the cables, as I said, are bullshit. But could it be possible that Roscoe himself forged these cables? Could it be possible that he was that let's say hypothetically he maybe did kill JFK? Could he have tried to have reconstruct what cables he might have been given?
The question you're asking me is the question you should ask Gary Shaw and say, why didn't you do your due diligence before the press conference rather than just blurting all this stuff out, make
Yeah,
everybody check it down? That's the first thing. The second thing, it wasn't investigated properly. I could give you the exact dates. I got a call from the Texas Attorney General's office. They found out I was working on the Roscoe White case. They were investigating it too. They were investigating it at the behest of the JFK Center, as well as Ray and Mary LaFontaine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there were two groups. She was demanding they investigate. They called me up and they said, would you be willing to drive down to Austin and meet with our investigators, and we'll go over our stuff and you go over your stuff with us? We sat down there, all right. I've got copies of the deal I made with them is they said, I'll give you copies of everything I got if you give me copies of everything you got. I got copies of everything they got, including some stuff that's not relative. Mm-hmm. So if Gary Shaw comes back and says it was not properly investigated, he has no idea about the time and expense the Attorney General's office went to investigate this, including bringing me down to discuss it. And we would sit around the table and I would say, that's where they got that. And they investigated a long period of time before they came out with Morales' statement that we've been looking into this. He has no idea of what they did down there. I had a Ned Butler. I had Ned Butler come to my house, sit in this room, go through all those files.
Yeah.
And he was doing it for the Attorney General at the behest of Mary LaFontaine. Because at the time, LaFontaine's thought there might be something to it. I thought there might be something to it. But every place I looked, there was all this little nitpicking stuff. The cables. Would you write a military cable on a kid's math tablet? Would you do that? Okay. And then you come to the question is, well, why would Roscoe do this? Well, apparently he wanted to be proven to be an assassin of Kennedy, which after talking to his mother, I don't believe that. I mean, I interviewed his mother. I interviewed his I interviewed three people in the Geneva White's family
Mhm.
And they were the ones that told me she could not have been working for Ruby because she injured herself at the cattleman's restaurant and was unemployed. And even then, I didn't believe it. And I went back and found it in the police records. So the whole thing just got worse and worse. And it happens with all, so you reach the point where, and they still come out now. Also, three quarters of $1 million. They went out there figuring they were going to come back selling this for Roscoe White.
Yeah, you talked about that. So like, just because someone wants to, you know, try to make money off of something that their father, off of a story that's supposedly true about their father, again, I don't think that totally disqualifies the fact that there could be a kernel of truth to the story. Does that make sense? Like, yes, they try to make money off of it. Yes, the cake, all this, but could there still be some kernel of truth? Because
Well, here's, here's the problem I have, and I understand that idea that there could
yeah,
be a. But the thing about it is, this is like the other stuff. If there is a kernel of truth in this,
mhm.
they have, by the way they approached it, destroyed it. That's basically the way I feel about it.
So, do you think that Ricky White is completely faked this story? Do you think he's completely lying, or
I, I, I,
separate
I,
separate
I
from
think
whether
it,
he's trying to make money off of it? Do you think he's completely lying about finding the diary, reading what the diary says right here? I mean, do you think that I mean, because to me, I just find it hard that to swallow that Ricky is lying about this. I don't think
I think his mother was behind the whole thing.
because because there's a quote from Larry Howard in 1992 that says, quote, "In the spring of 1990, Ricky Don White came through our doors at the Assassination Information Center in Dallas, Texas, wanting us to prove his father did not kill John Kennedy." So I think that shows honesty. And I think that shows honesty. If he was, if he was a mastermind behind all this is lying, then Ricky would say, help me, do confirm, try to confirm this theory that I'm allegedly making up. And
When was that written?
1992.
At one of these meetings, Ricky was there
Mm-hmm.
with Larry Howe. Okay, and we had enough stuff going. This was 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Gary went up to Ricky and said, "Dave and I have been working on this for months. We have enough information to show you that your dad is not involved in this whatsoever." He didn't pay any attention to us. Jim Lazar came out of there and said, "This is crap." Jim Lazar was so upset about this, and it's on my web pages and everywhere, that he sent a private investigator down here to look at this. So this business that Gary Shaw is saying that, oh, nobody's looking into this. No, the Attorney General's office, private investigators, all kinds of people have looked into this and found it wanting. Ricky has been trying to make money and movies and books about this story for years, and nobody will buy it. So he goes on and on.
Okay.
What you're saying here is you can go and say there's a kernel of truth in everything. There's a kernel of truth in everything, but eventually there's so much negative stuff. You got to say, okay, let's move on from this. There's a lot of kernels of truth in
Yeah.
Madeline Brown stuff,
Yeah.
but he wasn't even there. You
Yeah.
know, so
I agree that there's not much to go on um in the Ricky White, Roscoe White story. And also, it is true. This is from author Joseph McBride's book. He writes that Larry Howard and Bud Finsterwald changed their minds on the Roscoe White story. I didn't know about that. That was pretty
well,
amazing.
I meant in my book, I talk about us having the meeting and Finsterwald saying, uh, "You guys better find a new application." I,
Yeah, so that's pretty
and then
amazing.
at the end, I say I was shocked at the press conference when all of a sudden Finsterwald gets up and says, "If this requires further investigation." I walked out of there and I said to myself, "Wait a minute. A couple of weeks ago, he said he had it solved.
Yeah, so
Now
that
the people that should be doing the investigation are literally saying, "Oh, you guys need to investigate this for us."
yeah.
You know, and then when we go out investigate it for them, and we come up with these glitches, then they kick us out of the building. I mean, that's
So that's something that I don't think a lot of people know is that Larry Howard, the head of the Assassination Information Center, Larry Howard changed his mind on the Roscoe White story eventually. And also, as you said, Bud Finsterwald changed his mind on the story. And also, Jack White told McBride, quote, he was not convinced that Roscoe was a shooter in the assassination. So we have Larry Howard, Bud Finsterwald, Jack White, all these guys, and of course, Mary Farrell did not believe in Roscoe White. Is that correct?
right.
Yeah. So you have all these people backing off. This whole thing crashes and burns because, as I said, Geneva uh, shot it all to hell by forging a second diary and saying, "Oh, this is another one," as I said, and everyone said, "Oh, well, she's lying about that," and this whole thing, and so everyone, and it was every
Okay, Black
crash and burn. I agree that the green book or the journal that was found in the canister, is not a, witness elimination program book, as people have tried to say. Um, but,
Oh,
but
well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. They purported it to be a witness elimination book
yeah,
until I pointed out to them that one of the people in the book was Perry Raymond Russo,
yeah.
was alive in an Oliver Stone's picture.
Exactly. Yeah. And exactly. So I think that that's been hyperinflated. That the Green Book is a witness elimination program book. They published in Ricky's book from almost 2 years ago now. They published the entire Green Book, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is not a witness elimination program book. So I agree, it's not a witness elimination program book. But the question has to be asked, why would Roscoe write in his own handwriting in that journal that he killed the president? Why would he do that? Do you think he was doing it for satire? Do you think he was
Do
doing
we
it
have
for,
anything in it? Do we have anything in his own handwriting?
yeah, it's
No.
in his handwriting.
The second one?
No, I'm not. No, no. The witness elimination program book, the Green Book.
Oh, that's in Geneva's.
No,
No,
no, no, no, no, no, no. Okay, so this is what confuses a lot of people. We have
unless there's three books now.
yeah, there were yeah, okay, three books. Let's take this. Let's back up again. The first book was the original diary with hold on this
We don't have.
which which we don't have, and I'll touch on that in just a second. But we do
We
have
know that we know that Saul is
well.
okay.
Names aside, let's just list what we have. We have the Black Diary, which had this journal entry right here, which Ricky and his wife memorized. This is it right here. It was allegedly stolen by the FBI, and then in 1989, Ricky finds buried in his grandparents' house this canister, and inside the canister, one of the many things inside of it was the Green Book, which the Green Book, which has also falsely been called a witness elimination program book. In this Green Book, Roscoe writes in his own handwriting that he killed the president. Now, that's the second one, the Green Book. Now, the third book is the second diary that Geneva forged
Okay.
in 1990.
I don't mind telling anybody it's the truth. My mother created it. If it was for attention, money, or what, I don't know.
Ricky says instead of investigating his story further, the media attacked him. And that's why he's kept a low profile ever since.
Okay.
And that's what made this whole thing crash and burn.
Let's talk about the second one. That's the important one, right?
Yeah, this is the green. I'll insert an image right here, which shows the Green Book. But in that book, Roscoe says that he killed the president like 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Why would
what
he
I'd
do
like.
that? Why would he do that?
Here's what I'd like.
Mhm.
From the JFK assassination archives, a letter from a competent document analyzer
Mhm.
comparing something in Roscoe White's handwriting from 1962 and 1963 to the book.
Mhm.
And the statement saying, to a complete certainty, this was written by Roscoe White, because that's what researchers do. They don't come out and say, well, this was written by Roscoe White. Yeah, this was written by Roscoe White, and here's the certification
Mhm.
from a handwriting expert. And that's what you don't get in any of this from the research people.
I agree. I agree, but I agree. That's something I wish would happen. That that they would analyze Roscoe's legit handwriting compared to what he allegedly wrote in the Green Book when he says he shot Kennedy.
If I was called to bring it into court and show it before a judge and a jury, that's why I have all these footnotes. My Rashomon list, if you go down to the bottom of the list, it actually lists where the person comes from. And it's got to be in a book, a newspaper. There's got to be some kind of concrete proof.
You see, the thing is, and I want to read a quote from author Gary Cartwright, who wrote the famous 1990 article, I Was Mandarin, in the Texas Monthly magazine. Gary Cartwright wrote, quote, "If the Roscoe White story was a hoax, I decided early on Ricky was its victim, not its perpetrator. He no more could have invented or even acted out a hoax of this sophistication than he could have explained the universe." Now, the thing is, I agree with that statement. I saw Ricky White speak at a conference,
Yeah.
a year and a half ago, and the thing is, I don't think he or his mom were too bright to concoct a hoax like this. There has to be, in my mind, some kernel of truth. Yes, it's like yes, I agree that the cables are bullshit and were forged. Yes, I know that they jumped the gun in their research and they said wrong facts. Yes, I agree they tried to make money off of it, but it's like there has to be some kernel of truth to this.
Roscoe White was with the police department.
Somewhere. So again, if something
Now,
doesn't,
here's the thing you forget, though.
okay,
Forget about Matsu.
Matsu. Okay, for those that don't know, for the audience listening, Matsu was the research group formed by Ricky White in the '80s to investigate this whole story. All right, go on.
He, he went to Matsu and they formed a corporation.
Hmm.
Okay. And I've got the I've got the incorporation papers on my website.
Yeah, you have it on your website. I'll post an image right here to it. I'll post an image right here to it.
Well, when I originally came out with that, Larry Howard was still alive and he was going to sue me because he didn't want that. No, it had the payouts. It had the payouts for the story. How much each person was going to get with the story.
What did it say in the contract, in the Matsu contract about investigating
To
the goal?
create
The goal is
the
to
story around the life of Roscoe White.
create this. So not investigate, but to create a story.
Right, right. They say that.
Yes, and that goes back to what I said. It's like, yes, I agree that they tried to make money off of it, but that still does not mean that there isn't that kernel of truth. There has
Well,
to,
there is kernels of truth in it.
but okay, but like,
The question is this:
But like, why would Roscoe write in the Green Book, "I killed
I
Kennedy"?
I will I when I see the JFK Center's report from the handwriting expert, then I'll agree with you.
The But it has his signature like twice in the book. It has his signature in the book.
Well, then bring the signature to a handwriting expert. Of course, that could be traced. People have been known to pretty good do a good job of forging signatures, but not the whole document.
Like I said, I just don't think Ricky and his mom are too bright to forge this.
No,
To
I don't. Well, if you want to go down that road, I can say to you, okay, but somehow or other, a bunch of guys get together. They hear this story from this kid that maybe his father is involved. They decide they're going to make money off this. So they get together and they pull this whole thing together with Andy Berg and then Ricky White and his mother and finding these canisters with these phony documents, all
well,
that kind of stuff. I mean, my question is this, is once you find out enough of this that was put out by the JFK Center, which is a supposedly researching this, when they come out and they say, we've got it solved, and then they say, no, it needs further investigation. When Gary Shaw comes back and says it was not properly investigated, by who? By you guys. It wasn't. You guys are the one. Because Jim Lazar had to send Kevin Walsh down here to interview the guy that you should have investigated. Okay? You should have gone down to the attorney. The attorney general should have been calling you up and saying, come on down here, we want to see what you got, rather than calling me because I was doing the grunt work and they were sitting around, you know. The picture that they gave at the press conference of Roscoe White took the picture of Jack Ruby and Geneva White together. That was taken out of Time magazine, and it was attributed to Jimmy Rhodes. The picture of Oswald in the background with, supposedly Roscoe White with the bill of his cap down so you can't see his face. All right. I took that to Roscoe's mother and sister-in-law. They said, we don't know who that is. Yeah. So then went back. It was in a 1988 issue of Time magazine, and he was on Corregidor.
yeah.
So how many of these things are you going to put together to say that at some point Ricky knew that a lot of this was a flim-flam? The lie detector test. They sent him to a lot. I looked at that lie detector test, and I'd seen a lot of them. Okay. There was something fishy. I called the guy up and asked him about it. He sat down with Joe West, and they put the questions together. Right then and there, I knew there was a problem. What do? I send it over to two grapevine police officers who are detectives, and they said, this is the most hocus lie detector test we have ever seen in our lives. Okay. When I put that on the web page, and I think I put it in the Who Speaks for Roscoe White, Gary Shaw tore me a new one. How dare you? No, this guy is really competent. I called back later and they fired him for being incompetent. And then later on, Stockwell tells me he was sitting around with them and he started questioning the lie detector test. Okay. And all of a sudden, one of them says, well, he was on weed at the time, which would have avoided the lie detector test. And Stockwell sits up like, so they kind of dismissed the falsification of lie detector test because he was smoking weed. So they were doing it every place you went. They're not researchers. They are pumping stuff out to make?
You see, I think that's another thing that I was talking about. You know, even if Ricky White's lie detector test was poorly done, that doesn't mean he's being dishonest. I
No,
mean,
but if you're gonna take Roscoe White and bring him into court, if he was alive, and prosecute him, okay, the JFK Assassination Information Center is going to provide falsified documents to prove their case, and all they have to do is go to the cables to do that. Okay.
I already granted that.
But what I'm saying is we're going down two different paths.
Mhm.
I come from a world where you have to go into court and prove or disprove something. And witness statements are irrelevant. It's called cognitive dissonance.
Hmm.
All right, where you're so entrenched in something. And I can go over all the other kinds of things where there's a particle of truth. One of the things I like to talk about is have you got a cell phone?
Yes.
Okay. Has it got a camera?
Yes.
Can you roughly guess that there are probably billions of cell phones out there, right?
Mhm.
How come all the good pictures of the flying saucers are in the 1970s and there's not a good one today?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a that's a good point, but that's a good point, but that's still okay.
Well, I guess I'll never convince you. I'll never convince you. I mean, we could be doing the same thing over the James Files story.
No, no. I'm not saying I 100% believe Roscoe White was the killers of JFK and Officer Tippit. I'm just saying they're I'm just looking for that kernel of truth. Could this possibly be true? Okay, let's say hypothetically Roscoe kills Kennedy and Tippit, okay, writes about it in his diary, his black diary, puts it in his footlocker, tries to reconstruct cables that he may or may not have received, and he reconstructs them and he forges the cables, and those have been proven to be forged. Okay, then he writes about it in his green. He admits in his green book. He says, "I killed Kennedy," it's not a witness elimination program book, but there's a lot of ramblings and numbers in there, and maybe he's who knows, maybe he's a little fruity, maybe, and he just scribbling and everything, and he's like, oh, and he's like, you know what, this isn't really going anywhere. He takes he takes it, he takes his dog tag, and he takes other stuff. He stuffs them inside the steel canister, and he hides them in his parents' house. And then later in the 80s, Ricky finds all of this stuff. He finds the diary, he finds the steel canister, and then Ricky says, "You know what? I think we could make some money off of it." And then it takes off into a life of its own. A lot of details get wrong. You know, they pull stuff here and there again, trying to make money, but he's not lying about the original kernel of truth. And then this whole thing becomes a monster with a bunch of misinformation and misfortune. I mean, that's what I just described seems to check off all the hypothetically. If hypothetically that happened, that seems to check off all the boxes if it's true. But the one thing we need to do right now is to verify 100% that that's Roscoe's handwriting in the Green Book. What do you think?
That would be the first step. To take the green book and have that checked.
Yeah.
Something that they should have done, but okay, that's the first thing. The second problem I have with this that nobody really knows about because I've got this notebook here. I went over with Gary Mack because for him if he said that, well, he was there if he was alive, uh, and I interviewed uh, Roscoe's mother
Mhm.
and his stepsister,
Mhm.
Merle Rogers. Okay. Now, at the time, I wasn't thinking I needed to do this. I get hindsight is wonderful. I should have gotten a signed statement from them for this, but I didn't. I just got their report. Both of them said that Ricky came to them. There were, I think, Merle Rogers had one dog tag, and his mother had the other dog tag.
Hmm.
And Ricky came over to the house in the 80s and asked them for one of the dog tags. And after all this was hit, Merle was going to take him to court because I've got a letter where she wanted the dog tag.
She wanted it back.
She wanted it back because she said he didn't have a dog tag till he came over here, so there's no way in hell that dog tag was in the canister.
Was in the canister.
I got it from me. That's my dog tag in the canister. I got a lot of documentation about it. She was actually talking to me because the JFK Center was writing, well, no, we think this is Ricky's and you're going to have to sue and all that kind of stuff to get it.
I believe Ricky said he has
You got the cables and you got the dog tag and you got the green diary. The cables are false.
Yeah.
The dog tag, Merle Rogers claimed it came from her, and the green diary needs to be checked for authenticity. And just not the signature, the whole body of the diary.
I think that Ricky said I think Ricky has said that there were a couple that total dog tags of his dad's that he has seen over the years was like three or four or something.
I got another question. How many dog tags does a serviceman get or have? Is it just the one?
No, you get two.
Well, but he re-enlisted at one time.
Probably got two more.
He could have had four.
Yeah.
4 of them in availability. My aunt has 2 of them. I have one, and there's another one somewhere in my junk.
So to speak.
So it could be, so there could be, one dog tag in the canister, one dog tag that was that belonged to his mother.
Okay, let's go back. We got 3 things in the canister.
Mm-hmm.
We got the cables. Hale has said definitely forged, although I don't know by who. And
granted that, yeah.
One of the arguments was, why were they sealed in plastic? And if they were sealed in plastic, why were they cheap plastic if they were so important? And why was a government document written on this kid's math tablet paper? Well, they're coming back and saying, well, that's the way the CIA covers up everything. And we got all these professionals saying, no way, including the fact that Bowers couldn't spell his name correctly on one.
I already granted that, so yeah.
Okay. So we got the cables, all right. We got Merle Rogers, who was willing to say, him and his mother, okay, who said that they had 2 dog tags. And when Ricky came over and wanted a dog tag, the mother wanted to keep hers. So Merle gives her his dog tag from her stepbrother. Okay. And all of a sudden, a dog tag appears in a canister. So you got 3 items in there, all of questionable provenance. And the diary needs to be checked, but the diary should have been checked by the JFK Center. But the JFK Center was not interested in proving any of this stuff.
You mean the Green Book? Mean Green Book?
My question really is, have you validated the witness execution book in terms of authenticating the writing that it was Roscoe's, that it was Ricky's dad?
The handwriting Ricky has identified as and has his mother before she passed has the writings of his dad, and so that we're not concerned about.
I'm just wondering whether you had any independent validation. That's all. My question really is for the sort of wider JFKA research community is can you independently validate that the witness execution green book is in Roscoe's handwriting? Because if you can do that, it's a layup. It's just a done deal, isn't it?
All I can tell you is that it's been identified as Roscoe's, and he actually has his signature in two places in it, along with his military serial number that he wrote down. We didn't write it down. Look at what it says. Look at the artifacts themselves. And if that's not enough, we really can't do any more.
So let's nip this in the bud on Roscoe. It seems like if nothing rises above a 0.5 probability, I guess we'll say that we just don't know what the truth is regarding Roscoe White, because there's not much to go on. We have a diary memorization, but that's just
I guess,
testimony. We have a green book that we haven't verified his handwriting. We have a son who's sincere, who I don't think is lying, but has this whole thing has taken on a life of its own. But you know, as far as I can tell, Roscoe is the only person who, if that's his handwriting, is the only person that we have who actually wrote, and admitted, confessed, I shot Kennedy. So,
well, and think of it this way.
there's not much to go on.
Well, but wait a minute. You got that diary. I mean, back in
Journal.
1970, if this diary had popped up in 1970, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to make sure that the handwriting is accurate. And you go to any handwriting expert, and handwriting experts won't go off a signature because they know signatures can be forged. They're done all the time. All right.
Yeah.
So they go. That's where they go into the body, and they'll have these little red lines where the A goes one day. Now, here's my deal. There was a place in the West End called the JFK Assassination Information Center. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There was a place in Washington called the Assassination Archives and Research Center. All right. They all have research in their names. They are the ones that are responsible. They are the ones, as Kevin Walsh said, this could be an embarrassment if you go forward with this press conference. And I got the feeling that from what you say, Larry Howard and Bud Finsterwald, that was, we got to back off.
All and right? Jack White, too. And Jack White.
So the people that were supposed to do the due diligence were not doing it, but called a press conference anyway. So maybe at that point in time, as what's his name there up in Paris said, hey, Ricky got obsessed about this, and to give him the benefit of the doubt, okay, cognitive dissonance. But then you have a guy like Gary Mack walks up to him in 1991 and says, we have absolute proof your father wasn't involved. And he continued, never asked to see it, never said, show it to me. To which would say, Ricky, come on out to my house. I'll show you all the stuff. Never said it. Just sat there.
I guess that makes sense because, like I said, he's too far deep into it. He can't
cognitive.
But he can't back away. But like I said, that still doesn't mean that he concocted a hoax. And on the handwriting in the green book, Ricky said, "That's my daddy's handwriting," and it was verified by him and by Geneva that he wrote the green book. They said that's his handwriting. I mean.
Yeah, well, that doesn't, keep saying to yourself, will that cut it in the court of law? You go in a court of law and say, here's this book. The son says it's in his father's handwriting. Next. No, it doesn't work that way.
Well, Like I said,
That's what they should have, instead of having a press conference where they attributed photographs to
I
wrong
don't.
people, where they, some of those people at the press conference, all right, patently lie about stuff that went on. And when they got caught in a lie, they worked their way around it. Uh, I remember asking Larry Ray Harris, because he was the big Tippit expert. I said, whose jacket is that hanging in the back of the police car? And he says, well, we think that's Roscoe. We think it's Roscoe's? Oh, we know it's wrong. We think it's Roscoe.
See, that's the thing. You know, I'm really into the murder of Officer Tippit. In fact, it was Larry Harris's presentation at one of the Ask conferences that inspired me to research the murder of Tippit. And I learned very recently that Larry Harris privately believed, even though he never said it publicly, but he privately believed that Roscoe White shot Tippit. And I was like, if that's what the world's leading expert on Tippit concluded, is my research over then? I don't know. I don't. I don't know.
You gotta discount Markham and Benavides before Mark Lane got to him.
Well, but Benavides couldn't identify the shooter. He could identify.
But the physical shooting, okay,
Let's
whoever the guy was, he was not dressed in a police uniform, and he was outside the car, leaning down, talking through the draft window. I don't care who it is. It could be.
Do we know? Do we know that? Do we know that Roscoe was allegedly wearing a police uniform on the grassy knoll, or is that just an assumption?
Well, the report from some fellow officers is he was at a burglary scene being trained in burglaries up in North Dallas.
Yeah.
It's in there somewhere. So, okay, if we're gonna go there, then is their stuff incredible or is this stuff incredible?
Hmm.
I mean, that's the problem you run into. So, yeah, there's a kernel. And I tell you, if there was a picture of Roscoe White on November 22nd, 1963, at 12 o'clock in the living room of a house identified in North Dallas taking pictures,
Yeah.
it would be a bunch of guys saying, oh, that's forged. That's forged. I had a lot of respect for Larry Ray Harris. I thought he was one of the most competent of the crowd. And then he got into this whole business with, according to Ricky.
Well, he's saying according to Ricky's memorization right here of the diary entry. So it says in Roscoe's diary entry, it says right here, drove to Oak Cliff, met officer, told officer not to drive by house. Something was at this point wrong. Forced to take out officer at 10th and Patton, not going as planned. Backtracked to car, drove back to the area of takeout to locate other passenger. I assume that would be Oswald. Failed to transport subject, that would be Oswald, to Redbird Airfield. So it seems to
So now his best friend is.
He wasn't his best friend. Roscoe and Tippit were not best friends.
That's what Ricky said. They lived across the street from other. They were best friends.
Yeah.
How far do you have to go before you say, hey, God almighty, these guys are.
Like I said, I don't think Ricky had the capacity to completely forge things.
That's where we agree. What I'm doing is I'm saying to you is you got a company by the name of Matsu who actually writes out a document to be signed by Ricky, Geneva, and Ricky's brother, who
I already
committed
granted.
suicide years later.
I already
Okay,
granted. I
and
already granted that.
how they split the money.
I already granted that.
You got this stuff has got to be able to stand up. And if you went into a court of law with this, with what we've got so far, if we're on the right, we decided, okay, in absentia, we're going to prosecute Roscoe White for the assassination of Kennedy. In absentia, you go in there, these people have got nothing. They're going to end up in jail
So we.
or for perjury. All right. The very simple fact that Gary Mack, and I could get the date of this, walked up to Ricky and said, Dave and I have been working on this for months. We have absolute proof that your dad was not involved in the Kennedy assassination. And we will show it to you. He said, right now I'm ready to go. No, he didn't. He didn't answer anything. He didn't say anything.
I already granted that.
If I'm going to prove that your father didn't kill the president, aren't I? If let's turn the table. I said, the claim was your dad killed the president. I come to you and I say, I've got absolute proof your father didn't do it. Would you walk out of the room, or would you say, hey, I want to see that? That's going to say.
I already granted that, though. I already granted it. I think
if you grant that, then
I think at that point Ricky was probably too deep in it and he couldn't go out. He's like, he doesn't want to see it.
Okay, so then what happens is when we get this into court in absentia, he goes to jail for perjury because he's reached the point where he's going to tell lie after lie after lie to make this work.
I don't think he's concocting a hoax for the 1,000th time. I don't think he's lying. What about when Ricky said that he remembers a trip that he was on with his dad where he saw his dad and two other men firing rifles into an open car? I mean, is that pretty damning or what? That's
How old was
he? 3?
that?
See that? Huh? That answers that question. Well, you see, that's the thing. It could be that maybe his brother remembers that, and his brother told him, and Ricky's just repeating what his brother said.
No, but here's what the deal is. You keep saying it could be, it could be, it could be. I'm a guy that says I got to eliminate the could be's. I
don't think Ricky's lying though. I don't think he's a liar. I've seen him talk. He's a humble tree cutter.
I understand that.
He's not. I can't. Even Gary Cartwright, who wrote, of Texas Monthly Magazine, said, he doesn't think Ricky concocted this whole thing. I don't think Ricky did. So what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to see what's the truth. What's the truth here? And as I said, it seems like since there's not much to go on, it seems like we'll never know what the truth is regarding Roscoe White, but at the same time, it's the best case scenario because we have in his own handwriting, allegedly, he says, I killed Kennedy. So why would he write that? It's something for something.
Well, somebody's got to spend the money to have somebody look at that. And actually, if it was going to go into court, you'd need 2 independent ones who hadn't seen it. And I'll tell you
well, we're not in court. I mean, we're in a court of history. We're not in court. So, I mean.
Well, but you got a lot of people that probably have an interest in the Kennedy assassination that are certified in handwriting analysis that would probably do that for free. You just have to set it up correctly. Like, you send it off to this person and you send it off to that person. If Ricky found his father's complete military files in a footlocker in 1982, why was there need to ask for them again? Now, somebody like you might come back and say, well, he did it to find out if there was anything different. That would be the remark. But the argument is no, no.
That's true.
You know, it does not test out. And there's a lot of it in here. Now I'm not
See,
the
I'm not.
one
I'm
breaking
not.
the limited.
You
I
see,
think Matsu got a hold of a kid who had these thoughts about my father was on the Dallas Police Department at the same time as the assassination. And my mother, who's slightly screwball, is talking about how he may be involved. And he goes into this and he calls, there's still an argument about that Winwood safe deposit box and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
It was all spy kind of stuff that was written in a spy novel. It's not the way they work.
Okay, so this is from 2003 when you were on the Discovery Channel. This is when you're doing the different routes for the Tippit case with Gary Mack. I'm going to play this, and then
Is 5 minutes and 54 seconds.
so this is from Oswald House to the Tippit murder scene. For those who are listening, whether Oswald could have gotten there in time.
From here, there are 4 ways to get to the murder location of 10th and Patton. 2 of these routes are ruled out, as reliable witnesses along the way do not report seeing Oswald.
So that's true. That's true.
Witness.
Hey, there you are.
Jimmy Bird said he came from the opposite direction.
Exactly.
We did a timeline on it, and it was taken. Dale Myers and I go back and forth over this quite a bit.
Who does? Who?
Dale Myers.
Oh yeah. All right. So here.
Although nobody witnessed the first part of Oswald's journey, there are 2 witnesses who did see his final approach to the murder scene. But the testimony of these witnesses is contradictory. One witness saw Oswald walking westbound on 10th. And in order for him to be where this witness says he was, he would have had to walk this route.
3, 2, 1, start. 3, 2, 1, stop.
Adding up the maze of this indirect route gives us a total of 16 minutes and 11 seconds.
That won't work.
It's a tough fit, if it fits at all.
So, I mean, right there, it doesn't work. I mean, I know.
Here's what the deal, though.
Okay.
Here's the deal on that. Okay, here's the background. The idea was that all we were going to do was put out whatever we found as facts for other people to look at. Okay, we weren't there to prove or disprove anything, and that's why we did all those routes. The idea behind this stuff was to do the background research, and you know that clip. Not as many people write me about it now, but people have written me and said, we are so glad you guys did that because that whole area got torn up. And that's the only video that exists of those routes, even
of the yellow route, which they're going to do in just a second.
Yeah.
Of that route, yeah, because there's a school.
So anyway, and it's like the store. All I did was I laid out the stuff and said, okay, will this fit? Will this fit? Will this fit? Now, somebody could come back and say, yeah, it could be in 16 minutes, but all we cared about was getting the times down there in our own minds deciding if it could happen.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, well, yeah, but it's going to be real tough to do.
So it's not just Jimmy Burt who saw the killer walking down that route. It's also Bill Scoggins. We got a witness by the name of James Archer and Jimmy Brewer who was with him. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We also have, so we possibly Mr. Clark. So we have 5 or 6 people. Oh, and Red Smith, not William Arthur Smith, but Red Smith. So we have 5 or 6 witnesses who saw the killer, whoever he was, walking the blue route before Tippett even showed up. So it's not just Jimmy Burt. Maybe you guys mentioned that, but
Well,
the show did not.
what we were doing was basically, I mean, we weren't gonna get into the detail of everybody because you got only so much time you can do this. But we insisted that all of the potential routes be done and all of the potential routes be timed, so that 50 years from now, which, if somebody wants to look at it, it's there for them to look at and draw their own conclusions. We don't say this is the route he took. Well, this one seems to be most likely in our minds. All right. So we are leaving it up, and to me, this points out the difference between people who are doing legitimate research and the people that are, well, Oswald couldn't have taken this route. Well, okay, maybe you say that, but here's all the possibility directions that he could go in.
So this blue route that you guys walked is exactly what Oswald would have to have walked in order to be seen by those 5 witnesses in the neighborhood. But then what you guys did here, hold on.
All we were doing is trying to show for posterity the various routes that could have been taken and how much time we got on each one of them.
All right.
And would they match the investigation?
So then you guys do this test, which is just the Warren Report's direct route. Look, in the yellow route.
The first route we selected supports the testimony of an eyewitness who saw us.
See, that's the thing. Why do they say one eyewitness when it's actually, 6 witnesses who saw him with the blue route?
That's not up to me. I don't write the script. They write the script.
Okay, so 6 people saw.
But we run into that all the time. We run into that.
All right, let me play. Okay.
But our clock time of 16 minutes and 11 seconds would not have allowed Oswald to arrive at the scene by the time Tippett was killed. If the eyewitness who forced us to construct this route is correct, the case for Oswald as a lone gunman begins to fall apart.
So they say if Jimmy Burt is correct, but like I said, 5 other witnesses support him. So the narrator, whoever's writing this is getting it wrong, because you did not write the narration, correct?
Believe me, I've done a lot of this stuff, and they're producing it for television.
Okay, so you didn't write this.
But the Kennedy aficionados to go through it item by item.
Either someone helped him arrive in time, or someone else shot Officer Tippett. But there was another eyewitness, Helen Markham, and she was closer to the crime scene. Her testimony stated that she saw Oswald moving east, not west, on 10th. Is there a route that could place Oswald on this path towards Tippett's final location?
So what we need to do to test this is take the Crawford route, right?
Correct.
Okay.
This route takes Oswald along Davis for half a block, then up Crawford to 10th, then over to Patton, where he is confronted by Officer Tippett.
3, 2, 1, mark. I've never done it this tightly.
Okay.
And more in my mind is the possibility that this can be done. 3, 2, 1, stop.
The total time it took our Oswald to walk from the boarding house to the corner of 10th and Patton is 11 minutes, 10 seconds.
Plenty of time to...
Plenty of time for him to make it to this location in time to have the shooting take place.
You bet.
So another potential myth has been dispelled here today.
So you said in this program that by walking the yellow route, the Warren Report's route, that another myth has been dispelled. And that was relying on Helen Markham. But as I said, we have 6 other...
And Scoggin.
Huh?
And Scoggins, the cab driver.
Scoggins said he was taking the blue route, the first route that you guys did.
Walked in front of his cab.
That he did not walk in front of his cab. Because she says the thing, because do you see where I'm going with this? the blue route is the one that he would have had to have done if it was Oswald, because all these six witnesses, not just Jimmy Burt, as the program said, but the five other witnesses saw him walking the blue route, but they relied on Helen Markham of him going the yellow route, the 12-minute walk that the Warren report said. But apart from all the, there's so much, her credibility, Helen Markham's credibility is just crazy. But it has to be the blue route because six witnesses saw him taking the blue route, and if he was taking the yellow route, as the Warren report and Helen Markham claimed, he would have walked right in front of Scoggins' cab, feet in front of him. And Scoggins said no, he was going this way, take on the blue route. So if the yellow route is ruled out, then your first test in the video showing the blue route could not have worked, because that was 16, 17 minutes.
Have you ever been in court? Have you ever given testimony in court?
No.
Okay. There's a couple of things about this, all right? Number one, and again, this is something I tell people, but they really don't follow up. Have you ever heard of the Innocence Project?
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right. Have you ever heard of Elizabeth Loftus? I mentioned her in my book, by the way, Elizabeth Loftus. She's a cognitive psychologist. And
yeah, I have.
Generally speaking, we have all come to the conclusion that live testimony in court by a lot of people is completely unreliable. And the Innocence Project has proven that to be true. Generally speaking, using the figures that the Innocence Project has, extrapolating them, 40% of the people in prison should not be there because they are innocent, okay? Witness testimony is unreliable, particularly when they get into the hands of the attorneys and the attorneys start moving it off the line, so that by the time they get on the stand, they might be giving something completely different, but they are under the impression that it's correct. Elizabeth Loftus does studies about misinterpreted what they see and do, okay? Now, the thing about it is, I go back, there are 4 routes that he can take, all right?
Yeah.
To meet the Warren report and the timestamp, supposedly, unless that was altered, on the police department radios, all right? Not every route works.
Yeah, those two in the middle.
That's what we were saying. Okay.
Those two in the middle were limited.
It's up to you. If you want to decide that witness, that bunch of witnesses, that testimony was more reliable than that bunch of witnesses, okay, that's up to you. All we're doing is going into a court of law, like an accident reconstruction, and saying, okay, these are all the 4 routes. This one seems the most likely. But hey,
So you said in the documentary another myth has been dispelled. Do you think that the killer was walking the yellow route, and that these 6 witnesses who saw him walking the blue route are wrong?
But what I was saying was, I guess what I should have said was a bunch of myths were dispelled. You pick your own myth. You pick your own direction, and we've timed it. You're literally, everybody, I guess, reads too much into this stuff. All we're trying to do is lay out the evidence. Now, if I really wanted to, I could have turned to the producer and said, look, the blue route is out of the question, or the whatever route it is out of the, that's going to take way too much, the yellow route or whatever, the one going by Jimmy Burt. But I said, I want to do every possible route that we can do and time them. All right. Now, once I learned later, once this goes out there, they're going to do their own voiceovers. And now I did say this dispels another myth. All right. Well, one of the myths was the timing of the Warren Commission. Okay, you can go back in there and you can find we did our own timing and we found out and part of it, if you notice, it said, "Well, this is going to be a little bit different this time." I've been down there 5 or 6 times with a stopwatch, walking those routes. All right. Now I defy you. Let's go to the greatest researchers on the face of the earth that they think. Okay. Harrison Livingston, did he ever walk those routes or did he just talk about it in his book? No. Robert Groden, did he ever walk? Did Gary Shaw? None of them, all they do is they write the books what they perceive it to be.
So do you believe, so are you saying you believe the yellow route based on Helen Markham?
I don't know. I wasn't in a court of law. I wasn't there. Therefore, the bottom line is what I said to Robert Erickson. He was the producer. Okay, when we were talking about this, he says, "How long is this going to take?" I said, "Well, you're going to be able to edit this any way you want. But as far as I'm concerned, amongst the conspiracy theorists, there are 4 possible routes that he can take, and I want to time on camera all 4 of them." All right, that's basically all I wanted to do.
And 2 were eliminated. So, but
I didn't jump to any conclusions. I just said, well, I did. I said, well, this one doesn't seem to be possible.
Wait, so you don't think that the blue route that he took, the blue route, as Jimmy Burt said? Huh?
I'm talking from a legal position here. I wasn't there. I don't know. That's why we did all 4 routes. If we knew the route he took, if when the FBI went down there, somebody said, "I saw him go by my house," but I made a point out of saying, there's nobody on the street. Okay? There was nobody there to see him. They were all in watching television on the assassination. So he had to take one of these 4 routes to get there. That to me is a given. He had to take one of those 4 routes to have a. So let's do all 4 of the routes. And Erickson said, "Okay, well, if you want that, I'll do all 4 routes."
So do you think that it seems from that show that you believe he was taking the yellow route and that therefore all the 6 witnesses who saw him taking the blue route are wrong. Is that?
I'm just saying one route is more likely than the other. This is the most likely route.
Which route is that? The yellow route?
The one where Helen Markham says she came down Crawford and walked in front of the police car. That, based on timelines, not her testimony, but the timeline with the police transmissions off the tapes and all that kind of stuff, that seems to be the shortest, most direct route.
If that's correct, then that means the 6 witnesses who saw him take the blue route are wrong. I mean,
no,
that's you'd have to believe that they were wrong.
No, because that's what I get into. Witness testimony is unreliable.
So, I guess my question would be, how is Markham's testimony?
We're talking about 2 different things here. I'm talking about timelines. You're talking about witnesses. Remove the witnesses. Get them out of it.
Well, that's what we have to go on. We have to go by what?
No, we don't have to go on that. No, we don't have to go on. We can remove all those witnesses, all right? And I can just do the timeline. I don't care about Helen Markham. I don't care about Jimmy Bird. I mean, they're in there.
I don't think anyone disagrees that the yellow route is the most direct route. If he had left, if that was the most direct route. The question is, what the evidence shows, and that is that 6 witnesses saw a man walking the blue route before Tipper approached, and that's 17 minutes. That's too long of a walk for Oswald to have done it.
This is the problem. People that have no information on the judicial system do not understand.
Like I
Okay?
said, we're not in court. We're in a court of history, you know?
Yeah, but the same thing goes. The problem is witness test. 40% of witness testimony is shown to be unreliable.
Yeah.
Or one witness says something and the other person says, "Well, I'm going to help him along," and I saw the same thing too. All right. So what you do is you set up a test where you take the human element completely out of it. All right. Now,
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that all we did is we tested the potential routes that Oswald took. There were 4 of them. And I insisted that we time all 4 of them. All right. So supposedly, based on whatever was done with, what's his name? Benavini's on the radio before what's his name got over there. We have a rough idea of when the police call came in and can extrapolate within a few minutes when Tippit was actually shot.
Yeah.
All right. So now, taking all the humans out, and you have a police tape with a timestamp on it, and you have a bunch of routes that Oswald could have taken. Now, this is like I'd be testifying in court. Here's what I'd be saying. First of all, we have a timestamp on the police tapes.
Yeah, 116.
Now, we know Tippit was shot just prior. We don't know how soon before that, but we can extrapolate just a little bit before.
Let's say 114. Okay.
Well, whatever. You don't even have to do that. You can just say whatever. All right. Now the assailant could have taken one of 4 routes. These are the 4 routes that we did, and these are the times on each route. All right. This one, because it gets them there the fastest, seems the most likely. Now, I am not going to testify that he took that route. I'm just testifying from my test. This one seems the most likely.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Well, but
no one disagrees with that. That's the most indirect route. That's the most direct route.
Well, Jimmy Burt said this. Well, Jimmy Burt is a person. His testimony, Helen Markham is a person. Her testimony could be misinterpreted. All I'm saying is the Warren Commission and the tape says that he was shot prior to this particular time.
Yeah.
Here are 4 possible routes he could take. It's not up to me to decide which one the jury's going to take, but this one seems to be the most logical because it's the less time. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
So you think it's the yellow route because it gets him there in time.
I think the yellow route is the most conceivable because it gets them within the time frame of the tape. Now, here's what the defense attorney would do. Okay, Mr. Perry, what is the longest route? What is the longest route? Okay, the blue route?
Okay.
Mr. Perry, the longest route is the blue route. That's a minute and whatever.
16 minutes.
Would he make it if he was running? Yes. Because when we timed it, we were basing it on the fact that the FBI went through the neighborhood asking for a person walking briskly. I even say that on the tape. Okay. So yes, if he was running, if he was walking briskly, he could not make it. But if he was doing a combination of running and walking briskly, then he could make it. Okay. So yeah, that route does work. But here's what's going to happen. The attorney is and I've been there before. They would do this. They would say, okay, you say it's impossible because of these, there's all these witnesses, but he couldn't do it. No, I never said that. I said that route took that amount of time. Those people were standing there, but that route took that amount of time. Well, could he have made it if he was running? Yes, sir, he could have made it if he was running. See, this is one of the problems I got, and maybe this is the root of the problem. I keep thinking of all the times I got called in a court to testify, and defense attorneys or prosecution attorneys trying to screw me up. And over a period of time, you develop this sense, which says, I've said this to attorney. I got friends that are attorneys. I said, first of all, no attorney should ever ask a question he doesn't already know the answer to. That's number one. They never, okay. And number two, ask the questions in such a way that don't forget the possibility that somebody doing somebody else. So if you had done my test, if you were me, and we were in court, and you said this, okay, if I was the defense, I'd probably be saying about, what about all those other witnesses? What about all those witnesses up there? Well,
Yeah.
the idea behind the test was not the witnesses. The idea was to time the various routes. Oh, okay. Well, in there, you said that was the best route. No, what I said was that was the most likely route that fit the timeline. So then he says to me, could he have done any other of the three routes in time if he ran? Yes. All right. Now, if the attorney doesn't ask the question, if he's stupid enough not to ask the question, I'm not going to answer it. So part of this problem comes from the fact that, unfortunately, I have spent, not anymore. Well, with this kind of, I spent 30 years, being dragged into court. And sometimes I was there for the defense, sometimes I was there for the prosecution. And you get to the point where you say, no, I am not, I am going on factual information, not instances, not any of that kind of stuff.
So in your heart of hearts, do you believe he was taking the yellow, he took the yellow route, and that the six witnesses who saw him go the blue route are wrong? Is that what you believe in your heart of hearts? So you believe Helen Markham's right and they're wrong. Is that correct?
If you were the attorney asking me that question,
Huh?
I would say, in my heart of hearts, I don't know. I know it's one of those four routes, but I don't know.
So in your heart of hearts, you have no idea which route he took, right?
No, all I did was I gave you the facts.
I thought you said earlier that you believe it was the yellow route.
Well, I said, if somebody asked me, I would say that is the most likely one based on a person walking briskly. If you go back and you listen to
Like I said, like I said, if we believe the yellow route, we have to believe these six witnesses are wrong. I just don't think that's, that's.
Well, that's because you are interested in witness testimony, which has been shown to be regularly to be unreliable.
So if we agree that witness testimony is unreliable, could we discount the four witnesses who picked Oswald out of a lineup? By that logic? As the typical killer?
Well, the argument I would have there about that, and then we're getting off on other stuff. I have a problem with the lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So technically speaking, I would say that the way they set up the lineup, just by the people that were, never mind somebody coming in, I think, and this was remember, this was a 1963 lineup. This is, but I even mentioned this to Lavelle. I said, I thought the lineup was jury room. Never mind. And he said to me, well, he says, the witnesses. And I said, well, this is, to me, this is like you have three guys in a three-piece suit and another guy in dungarees and a dirty jacket, and you say, which one do you see?
So you
And you know what Lavelle said to me?
what?
You're talking like a friggin' attorney. I said, yeah, because I've been there, Jim.
So you agree? So do you agree that because that's like the biggest linchpin that the Warner report says is, well, many people, lots of people identified him in the lineup or shown a photo by the FBI, but using what you just said, how witnesses are unreliable, those have to be out the window, right?
Well, not only that, I think the lineup was jury.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I don't need. See, this is where we and I don't exactly see eye to eye. I don't. I believe witness testimony is useless because as time goes by, thoughts come into your head. You have memories when you were younger that are actually not true. So do I.
Yeah.
It's called cognitive dissonance. Okay, so I try to eliminate that stuff.
Okay, great. So if witness testimony is not reliable, then what's the evidence that Oswald killed Tippit? Then, if we throw out the witness testimony,
Uh, the guy happens to be in the book depository when the shooting takes place. His shell casings are directed to the gun at the Tippit shooting. Calloway sees the guy running down the street or the alleyway. He ends up in front of Brewer's dress shoe shop, and then he ends up in the Texas Theater. Oh, he takes a gun out and he tries to kill Nick McDonald.
well, no one disagrees with that. So, I mean,
By the way, I interviewed Nick. Well, I was up in Little Rock. He was in Hot Springs. Anyway, and it turns out he's the only guy in all those places. So my point is, as a defense attorney, how how do how do I get around all this? How do I get around all this stuff?
I think it's pretty simple. As we said earlier, if Oswald is entangled in a conspiracy as a double agent who was double crossed, he would, he's entangled in some sort of conspiracy. He would leave the deposit. It would make sense that he would leave the depository and then go to a movie theater, which maybe uh, was going to be his meeting some sort of handler, and then the cops show up, and then he would, fight the cops, and then he would lie to the cops. So like that, all that, him being involved in a conspiracy checks off all these boxes. You know what I mean? So it seems like it's the shells that made you believe that Oswald shot Tippett, right?
To me, the linchpin is a couple of them. First of all, that room I just showed you, and the wedding ring in the teacup.
The what that you just showed me?
The wedding ring in the teacup.
And what was the other one?
And the fact that he appeared in all those three places, or four places.
I'm talking about just about JD Tippett. So you think it's the shells, right? For just
The shell casings prove that he was at the scene. That's all it does.
what do you think about critics have the arguments against that from critics about how the shells, weren't entered into evidence for 6 days and all that stuff, and there's, the witnesses who found those shells, they can't identify them, and the officers who put their initials in them, they can't identify it. So it's like, what do you think of that? I mean, these are basic things that have been talked about for many years. What's your reaction to some of that?
Well, first of all, you got to go back and look. It seemed to me that Virginia and Barbara Davis came out of the house and pointed to the shells, and they
later that night they found the shells. The first two shells were found by Benavides, pointed out. Yeah.
this goes back to people creating. Okay, I want to see the proof of how those shells were handled. I
Yeah,
want to see the chain of custody of those shells.
that's the
I
thing.
don't want to talk about how so and so said he couldn't find his initials on them. I want to see the exact chain of custody of those shells.
That's the problem, Dave. There is no, I've looked. There is no chain of custody on those shells. I mean, okay, so it starts from the chain of custody starts, of course, from the crime scene. It's picked up, it's put into a cigarette pack, and where does it go? We don't know. Does it take in? It's taken to the station. Who takes it there? Where does it go?
Did they disappear? I guess my question is, did they disappear or did they show up eventually?
But it's like, but the chain of custody, what is it? Is it put in a box? Is it put in a drawer? Is it put in a desk? Is it put in an envelope? Is it put in a plastic bag? Is it put on a shelf? Is it put in a cabinet? We don't know. That's the thing. There is no chain of custody for those shells.
First of all, there's a chain of custody today and a chain of custody in 63. Okay?
Yeah, but yeah.
My question is, eventually, we know the bullet showed up, right? They took them out of Tippit.
Yeah.
Did the shell casing show up? Because I think there were 4 of them. 2 of them were Remington Peters and one was, or
Yeah.
Remington Peters. So the shell casings did show up. So that if shell casings showed up and bullets showed up, then what has to happen is somewhere in the chain of custody, somebody had to swap out.
Yeah. I think that
shell casings they got out of his gun, by the way. They got to swap those out for the ones of the real shooter.
One of
a lot of this stuff.
I think the only thing necessary to cover up the Tippit case is to switch out those shells. And I've talked to many cops from the 60s and 70s, and I said, "Did you guys used to swap out evidence and plant evidence?" And they said, "Oh, hell yeah, we used to wrap cases up like that. Hell yeah, we used to do that." You know what I mean? So I'm like, and I think one of the cops even admitted to author Henry Hurt that yes, we switched out the shells. So, I mean, it's not some massive effort to cover this up or fake this, fake this. I think all that needed to be done
Okay, well, my
is
question
to switch the shells.
Okay. So the
It's
shells,
easy.
so the shells are switched.
Yeah. And that's it.
How come of all the people on the face of the earth, Oswald ends up in the Texas stand?
What do you mean?
Of all the people in the book depository,
Uh-huh.
one guy who's missing ends up ducking into Johnny Brewer's shoe store.
Yeah.
Then goes up in the Texas theater.
I think based on the available evidence, I think he was probably meeting someone.
There's all these rabbit holes, but the bottom line, this is where you and I are like on different sides, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Not a bad thing, all right? But I am interested in factual evidence that will stand up in a court of law.
Yeah, I don't think
testimony does not stand up in a court of law.
I don't think those Tippit shells will stand up in a court of law. Like I said, there's no chain of custody. And the witnesses who found those shells can't identify it, and the officers who marked those shells can't find their initials. As you said, the shells are the only thing that apparently link Oswald to the Tippit scene, and it's very simple to just switch them out. And given the available evidence, I think they were probably just switched out. It's simple. That's all that was needed to do.
Why?
Because there's no chain of custody.
Yeah, but why were they swapped out?
I think the answer comes from Jim Lovell when during the lineups, when he's telling the witnesses, he said, "We're going to wrap this case right up. We got a suspect in that lineup. Take a good hard look at him. We're going to wrap him up real tight. We think he's the one who shot the president. But, we're going to nail this guy."
Okay. Now that's true. That's Jim Lovell talking, right?
Yeah. So I think they
Let's go
wanted.
back to let's go back to my original point.
Mm-hmm.
You've had the president shot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You got a police officer shot. All right. You don't know who did it. Right. You got various testimony from different witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to change the shell casings out.
Yeah.
And replace them with shell casings that came from Oswald's gun.
Yes. I think that was the only thing.
To what end?
I think that was the only thing necessary to cover up to pin it on Oswald for the Tippit murder.
So, who murdered Tippit?
I don't know.
So this was a random event shortly after the president got shot, when the only guy in the vicinity was the guy when Truly said, "What happened to the new guy? He's missing."
I think we have to. Well, Oswald wasn't the only one missing. There were actually. You see, that's the thing. It's like, why do you say that Oswald was the only man missing from the building? Because if we look at all the reports, Oswald.
I know there are a bunch of people missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But from the book depository, not from McMillan and the rest of it, from the book depository, Truly started it. Will Fritz just walked into the building. He was looking around. Where's the new guy? The minutia of this is the argument is whether there was a roll call or not. They got me involved in this. Somebody said to me, he said, there was a roll call and Oswald was missing. I wrote him back and I said,
also, Charles Gibbons was also missing. So,
okay. Now here's the deal. All right. Yeah. All of this circumstantial, not witness evidence now. I'm not talking about witnesses. All of this circumstantial evidence is stacking up against him. That's the problem that I have with it. Now, he could, at that point, he could have been completely sucked in by the CIA, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at. But to get him away from the assassination and the assassination of Tippit, because I could say, okay, I want a list of all Russian defectors that were in the vicinity of Tippit when he was shot.
Mm-hmm.
I can only think of one.
Do you have any closing remarks, any future advice for people or anything like that? Or any closing remarks? Or?
I, to a certain extent, this is like the Lincoln assassination. This is like us talking about the Lincoln assassination in 1933, okay? My big fear now is with artificial intelligence, the right evidence. I was always worried about evidence being destroyed. I'm now, when you can superimpose Donald Trump on the Pope, his face, that kind of stuff, or put MS-13 on some. I am afraid artificial intelligence is not only going to destroy what we're looking for in Kennedy. Hopefully it's not. I really depend on the bond indexes to help us out and the fact that eventually the government will release this. Right. But my bottom line is, yes, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I cannot get Oswald away from Kennedy or Tippit right now, just by the actions that he took before and afterwards. I cannot eliminate the CIA as being complicit because of their continued cover-up and the fact that they had ZR rifle, which we didn't know about till the 1970s, where they were killing foreign leaders. It took us years to find out that Cabela was actually in a hotel room and we now know a papermate pen. Gunn made 3 of them, and he made the needles so fine that it felt like you had a starched shirt on you. And what was happening, Cabela was supposed to go back and look up Black Leaf 40. Look that up. It's a nicotine-based poison. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Now, so my feeling is the CIA, more than the FBI, the FBI is completely trying to cover up their total incompetence in this. To me, they were totally incompetent. The CIA is, I'm in the malfeasance mode right now, not the incompetence mode,
Mm-hmm.
because they were very competent and they let him loose without telling anybody. So my angle for years has been Mexico City and the CIA. I don't care about the autopsy, the ballistics. All that stuff to me is sideshows. You go to the place where they don't want to give you the information. And they don't want to give you the information on JM Wave, George Janides, the DRE, and ZRI.
So that's what is zero. So that's
the-
what is zero in.
The CIA. And I'm like Jeff Morley. I'm beginning to believe they're not going to give it to him.
We shall see.
Find a way. The only thing we have that to me is really good is Morley got that Vaughn index. So we know this stuff exists.
We still have a lot more work to do. Hey, Dave, thanks again.
Hey, anytime. All righty. Talk to you later.
You take care, all right? Appreciate it.
Okay, I this may be what I'm looking for.
And cut. That was fun.